Hi there and welcome. So glad to have you joining me again today for our daily reading of the Oz books, and we are on The Magic of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Yesterday's reading, Kiki Aru and Rigetto had gone to the forest of Gugu and convinced the animals there that they were magicians. And the animals decided that the next morning they would convene and decide if they were going to allow Kiki to transform them into other animals and take over the land of Oz. We also had Captain Bill building a raft so that he, Trot, and the glass cat would be able to get past the river onto the island where the magic flower resides. So let's go ahead and pick up with chapter 10 and see what all our friends end up doing today in these chapters. So this is chapter 10, Stuck Fast. The day was nearly gone when, at last, the raft was ready. "It ain't so very big," said the old sailor, "but I don't weigh much, and you, Trot, don't weigh half as much as I do, and the glass pussy don't count." "But it's safe, isn't it?" inquired the girl. "Yes, it's good enough to carry us to the island and back again, and that's about all we can expect of it." Saying this, Captain Bill pushed the raft into the water, and when it was afloat, stepped upon it and held out his hand to Trot, who quickly followed him. The glass cat boarded the raft last of all. The sailor had cut a long pole and had also whittled a flat paddle, and with these he easily propelled the raft across the river. As they approached the island, the wonderful flower began to become more plainly visible, and they quickly decided that the glass cat had not praised it too highly. The colors of the flowers that bloomed in quick succession were strikingly bright and beautiful, and the shapes of the blossoms were varied and curious. Indeed, they did not resemble ordinary flowers at all. So intently did Trot and Cap'n Bill gaze upon the golden flower pot that held the magic flower that they scarcely noticed the island itself until the raft beached upon its sands. But then the girl exclaimed, "How funny it is, Cap'n Bill, that nothing else grows here except the magic flower." Then the sailor glanced at the island and saw that it was all bare ground, without a weed, a stone, or a blade of grass. Trot, eager to examine the flower closer, sprang from the raft and ran up the bank until she reached the golden flower pot. Then she stood beside it motionless and filled with wonder. Cap'n Bill joined her, coming more leisurely, and he too stood in silent admiration for a time. "Ozma will like this," remarked the glass cat, sitting down to watch the shifting hues of the flowers. "I'm sure she won't have as fine a birthday present from anyone else." "Do you suppose it's very heavy, Captain? And can we get it home without breaking it?" asked Trot anxiously. "Well, I've lifted many bigger things than that," he replied, "but let's see what it weighs." He tried to take a step forward, but could not lift his meat foot from the ground. His wooden leg seemed to be free enough, but the other would not budge. "I seem stuck, Trot," he said with a perplexed look at his foot. "It ain't mud and it ain't glue, but something's holding me down." The girl attempted to lift her own feet to go nearer to her friend, but the ground held them as fast as it held Cap'n Bill's foot. She tried to slide them or to twist them around, but it was no use. She could not move either's foot a hair's breadth. "That's funny," she exclaimed. "What do you suppose has happened to us, Cap'n Bill?" "I'm trying to make it out," he answered. "Take off your shoes, Trot. Perhaps the leather sole's that's stuck to the ground." She leaned down and undid her shoes, but found she could not pull her feet out from them. The glass cat, which was walking around as naturally as ever, now said, "Your foot has got roots to it, Cap'n, and I can see the roots going into the ground where they spread out in all directions. It's the same way with Trot. That's why you can't move. The roots hold you fast." Cap'n Bill was rather fat and couldn't see his own feet very well, but he squatted down and examined Trot's feet and decided that the glass cat was right. "This is hard luck," he declared, in a voice that showed he was uneasy at the discovery. "We're prisoners, Trot, on this funny island, and I'd like to know how we're ever going to get loose so's we can get home again." "Now I know why the Kaleida laughed at us," said the girl, "and why he said none of the beasts ever came to this island. The horrid creature knew we'd be caught and wouldn't warn us." In the meantime, the Kaleida, although pinned fast to the earth by Cap'n Bill's stake, was facing the island, and now the ugly expression which passed over its face when it defied and sneered at Cap'n Bill and Trot had changed to one of amusement and curiosity. When it saw the adventurers had actually reached the island and were standing beside the magic flower, it heaved a breath of satisfaction, a long, deep breath that swelled the deep chest until the beast could feel the stake that held him move a little, as if withdrawing itself from the ground. "Aha!" murmured the Kaleida. "A little more of this will set me free and allow me to escape." So he began breathing as hard as he could, puffing out his chest as much as possible with each indrawing breath. And by doing this, he managed to raise the stake with each powerful breath until at last the Kaleida, using the muscles of his 4 legs as well as his deep breaths, found itself free of the sandy soil. The stake was sticking right through him, however, so he found a rock deeply set in the bank and pressed the sharp point of the stake upon the surface of this rock until he had driven it clear through his body. Then, by getting the stake tangled among some thorny bushes and wiggling his body, he managed to draw it out altogether. "There!" he exclaimed. "Except for those 2 holes in me, I'm as good as ever. But I must admit that old wooden-legged fellow saved both himself and the girl by making me a prisoner." Now the Kaleidas, although the most disagreeable creatures in the land of Oz, were nevertheless magical inhabitants of a magical fairyland, and in their natures a certain amount of good was mingled with the evil. This one was not very revengeful, and now that his late foes were in danger of perishing, his anger against them almost faded away. "Our own Kaleida King," he reflected, "has certain magical powers of his own. Perhaps he knows how to fill up these 2 holes in my body." So without paying any more attention to Trot and Cap'n Bill than they were paying to him, he entered the forest and trotted along a secret path that led to the hidden lair of all the Kaleidas. While the Kaleida was making good its escape, Cap'n Bill took his pipe from his pocket, filled it with tobacco, and lighted it. Then, as he puffed out the smoke, he tried to think what could be done. "The glass cat seems all right," he said, "and my wooden leg didn't take roots and grow either, so it's only flesh that gets caught. It's magic that does it, Cap'n." "I know, Trot, and that's what sticks me. We're living in a magic country, but neither of us knows any magic, and so we can't help ourselves." "Couldn't the Wizard of Oz help us, or Glenda the Good?" asked the little girl. "Ah, now we're beginning to reason," he answered. "I'd probably have thought of that myself in a minute more. By good luck, the glass cat is free, and so it can run back to the Emerald City and tell the wizard about our fix and ask him to come and help us get loose." "Will you go?" Trot asked the cat, speaking very earnestly. "I'm no messenger to be sent here and there," asserted the curious animal in a sulky tone of voice. "Well," said Cap'n Bill, "you've got to go home anyhow, 'cause you don't want to stay here, I take it. And when you get home, it wouldn't worry you much to tell the wizard what's happened to us." "That's true," said the cat, sitting on its haunches and lazily washing its face with one glass paw. "I don't mind telling the wizard when I get home." "Won't you go now?" pleaded Trot. "We don't want to stay here any longer than we can help, and everybody in Oz will be interested in you and call you a hero and say nice things about you because you helped your friends out of trouble." That was the best way to manage the glass cat, which was so vain that it loved to be praised. "I'm going home right away," said the creature, "and I'll tell the wizard to come and help you." Saying this, it walked down to the water and disappeared under the surface. Not being able to manage the raft alone, the glass cat walked upon the bottom of the river, as it had done when it visited the island before, and soon they saw it appear on the farther bank and trot into the forest, where it was quickly lost to sight among the trees. Then Trot heaved a deep sigh. "Captain," she said, "we're in a bad fix. There's nothing here to eat, and we can't even lie down to sleep, unless the glass cat hurries and the wizard hurries. I don't know what's going to become of us." Chapter 11. The Beasts of the Forest of Gugu. That was a wonderful gathering of wild animals in the forest of Gugu the next sunrise. Rango the gray ape had even called his monkey sentinels away from the forest edge, and every beast, little and big, was in the great clearing where meetings were held on occasions of great importance. In the center of the clearing stood a great shelving rock, having a flat, inclined surface, and on this sat the stately leopard Gugu, who was the king of the forest. On the ground beneath him squatted Bru the bear, Lu the unicorn, and Rango the gray ape, the king's 3 counselors, and in front of them stood the 2 strange beasts who called themselves Limaneags, but were really the transformations of Ruggedo the gnome and Kiki Aru the high-up. Then came the beasts, rows and rows and rows of them. The smallest beasts were near the king's rock throne. Then there were wolves and foxes, lynxes and hyenas and the like. Behind them were gathered the monkey tribes, who were hard to keep in order because they teased the other animals and were full of mischievous tricks. Back of the monkeys were the pumas, jaguars, tigers, and lions, and their kind. Next, the bears, all sizes and colors. After them, bisons, wild asses, zebras, and unicorns. Farther on, the rhinoceri and the hippopotami, and at the far edge of the forest, close to the trees that shut in the clearing, was a row of thick-skinned elephants, still as statues, but with eyes bright and intelligent. Many other kinds of beasts, too numerous to mention, were there, and some were unlikely any beasts we see in the menageries and zoos in our country. Some were from the mountains west of the forest, and some from the plains at the east, and some from the river. But all present acknowledged the leadership of Gugu, who for many years had ruled them wisely and forced all to obey the laws. When the beasts had taken their places in the clearing, and the rising sun was shooting its first bright rays over the treetops, King Gugu rose on his throne. The leopard's giant form, towering above all the others, caused a sudden hush to fall on the assemblage. "Brothers," he said in a deep voice, "a stranger has come among us, a beast of curious form who is a great magician and is able to change the shapes of men or beasts at his will. This stranger has come to us with another of his kind from out of the sky to warn us of a danger which threatens us all, and to offer us a way to escape from that danger. He says he is our friend, and he has proved to me and to my counselors his magic powers. Will you listen to what he has to say to you, the message he has brought from the sky?" "Let him speak!" came the great roar from the great company of assembled beasts. So Ruggedo the gnome sprang upon the flat rock, beside Gugu the king, and another roar, gentle this time, showed how astonished the beasts were at the sight of his curious form. His lion's face was surrounded by a mane of pure white hair. His eagle's wings were attached to the shoulders of his monkey body, and were so long that they nearly touched the ground. He had powerful arms and legs in addition to the wings. and at the end of his long, strong tail was a golden ball. Never had any beast beheld such a curious creature before, and so the very sight of the stranger, who was said to be a great magician, filled all present with awe and wonder. Kiki stayed down below, and, half hidden by the shelf of rock, was scarcely noticed. The boy realized that the old gnome was helpless without his magic power, but he also realized that Ruggedo was the best talker. So he was willing the gnome should take the lead. "Beasts of the forest of Gugu," began Ruggedo the gnome. "My comrade and I are your friends. We are magicians. From our home in the sky, we can look down into the land of Oz and see everything that is going on. Also, we can hear what the people below us are saying. That is how we heard Ozma, who rules the land of Oz, say to her people, 'The beasts in the forest of Gugu are lazy and are of no use to us. Let us go to their forest and make them all our prisoners. Let us tie them with ropes and beat them with sticks until they work for us and become our willing slaves.' And when the people heard Ozma of Oz say this, they were glad and raised a great shout and said, 'We will do it. We will make the beasts of the forest of Gugu our slaves.'" The wicked old gnome could say no more just then, for a fierce roar of anger rose from the multitude of beasts that his voice was drowned by the clamor. Finally, the roar died away like a distant thunder, and Ruggedo the gnome went on with his speech. "Having heard the Oz people plot against your liberty, we watched to see what they would do, and saw them all begin making ropes long and short, with which to snare our friends the beasts. You are angry, but we are also angry, for when the Oz people became the enemies of the beasts, they also became our enemies. For we too are beasts, although we live in the sky. And my comrade and I said, 'We will save our friends and have revenge on the Oz people.' And so we came here to tell you of your danger and of our plan to save you." "We can save ourselves," cried an old elephant. "We can fight." "The Oz people are fairies, and you can't fight against magic unless you also have magic," answered the gnome. "Tell us your plan," shouted the huge tiger, and the other beasts echoed his words, crying, "Tell us your plan." "My plan is simple," replied Ruggedo. "By our magic, we will transform all you animals into men and women, like the Oz people, and we will transform all the Oz people into beasts. You can then live in the fine houses of the land of Oz, and eat the fine food of the Oz people, wear their fine clothes, and sing and dance and be happy. And the Oz people, having become beasts, will have to live here in the forest, and hunt and fight for food, and often go hungry, as you do now, and have no place to sleep but a bed of leaves or a hole in the ground. Having become men and women, you beasts will have all the comforts you desire, and having become beasts, the Oz people will be very miserable. That is our plan, and if you agree to it, we will all march at once into the land of Oz and quickly conquer our enemies." When the stranger ceased speaking, a great silence fell on the assemblage, for the beasts were thinking of what he had said. Finally, one of the walrus asked, "Can you really transform beasts into men, and men into beasts?" He can," cried Lou the unicorn, prancing up and down in an excited manner. "He transformed me only last evening, and he can transform us all." Gugu the king now stepped forward. "You have heard the stranger speak," said he, "and now you must answer him. It is for you to decide. Shall we agree to this plan or not?" "Yes," shouted some of the animals. "No," shouted others, and yet some were yet silent. Gugu looked around the great circle. "Take more time to think," he suggested. "Your answer is very important. Up to this time, we have had no trouble with the Oz people, but we are proud and free, and never will become slaves. Think carefully, and when you are ready to answer, I will hear you. Chapter 12. Kiki uses his magic. Then arose a great confusion of sounds, as all the animals began talking to their fellows. The monkeys chattered, and the bears growled, and the voices of the jaguars and lions rumbled, and the wolves yelped, and the elephants had to trumpet loudly to make their voices heard. Such a hubbub had never been known in the forest before, and each beast argued with his neighbor until it seemed the noise would never cease. Ruggedo the gnome waved his arms and fluttered his wings to try to make them listen to him again, but the beasts paid no attention. Some wanted to fight the Oz people, some wanted to be transformed, and some wanted to do nothing at all. The growling and confusion had grown greater than ever, when in a flash silence fell on all the beasts present. The arguments were hushed, and all gazed in astonishment at a strange sight. For into the circle strode a great lion, bigger and more powerful than any other lion there, and on his back rode a little girl, who smiled fearlessly at the multitude of beasts. And behind the lion and the little girl came another beast, a monstrous tiger, who bore upon his back a funny little man carrying a black bag. Right past the rows of wondering beasts, the strange animals walked, advancing until they stood just before the rock throne of Gugu. Then the little girl and the funny little man dismounted, and the great lion demanded in a loud voice, "Who is king of this forest?" "I am," answered Gugu, looking steadily at the other. "I am Gugu the Leopard, and I am king of this forest." "Then I greet your majesty with great respect," said the lion. "Perhaps you have heard of me, Gugu. I am called the Cowardly Lion, and I am king of all beasts, the world over." Gugu's eyes flashed angrily. "Yes," he said, "I have heard of you. You have long claimed to be the king of beasts, but no beast who is a coward can be king over me." "He isn't a coward, your majesty," asserted the little girl. "He's just cowardly, that's all." Gugu looked at her. All the other beasts were looking at her too. "Who are you?" asked the king. "Me? Oh, I'm just Dorothy," she answered. "How dare you come here?" demanded the king. "Why, I'm not afraid to go anywhere if the Cowardly Lion is with me," she said. "I know him pretty well, and so I can trust him. He's always afraid when we get into trouble, and that's why he's cowardly. But he's a terrible fighter, and that's why he isn't a coward. He doesn't like to fight, you know, but when he has to, there isn't any beast living that can conquer him." Gugu the king looked at the big, powerful form of the Cowardly Lion and knew she spoke the truth. Also, the other lions of the forest now came forward and bowed low before the strange lion. "We welcome you, your majesty," said one. "We have known you many years before you went to live at the Emerald City, and we have seen you fight the terrible Kaleidas and conquer them, so we know you are king of all beasts." "It is true," replied the Cowardly Lion, "but I did not come here to rule the beasts of this forest. Gugu is king here, and I believe he is a good king and just and wise. I come with my friends to be the guest of Gugu, and I hope we are welcome." That pleased the great leopard, who said very quickly, "Yes, you at least are welcome to my forest. But who are these strangers with you?" "Dorothy has introduced herself," replied the lion, "and you are sure to like her when you know her better. This man is the Wizard of Oz, a friend of mine who can do wonderful tricks of magic. And here is my true and tried friend, the Hungry Tiger, who lives with me in the Emerald City." "Is he always hungry?" asked Lou the unicorn. "I am," replied the tiger, answering the question himself. "I'm always hungry for fat babies." "Can't you find any fat babies in Oz to eat?" inquired Lou the unicorn. "There are plenty of them, of course," said the tiger. "But unfortunately, I have such a tender conscience that it won't allow me to eat babies. So I'm always hungry for 'em and never can eat 'em because my conscience won't let me." Now, of all the surprised beasts in that clearing, not one was so much surprised at the sudden appearance of these four strangers as Ruggedo the gnome. He was frightened, too, for he recognized them as his most powerful enemies. But he also realized that they could not know he was the former king of the gnomes, because of the beast's form he wore, which disguised him so effectually. So he took courage and resolved that the wizard and Dorothy should not defeat his plans. It was hard to tell just yet what the vast assemblage of beasts thought of the new arrivals. Some glared angrily at them, but more of them seemed to be curious and wondering. All were interested, however, and they kept very quiet and listened carefully to all that was said. Kiki Aru, who had remained unnoticed in the shadow of the rock, was at first more alarmed by the coming of the strangers than even Ruggedo was, and the boy told himself that unless he acted quickly and without waiting to ask the advice of the old gnome, their conspiracy was likely to be discovered and all their plans to conquer and rule Oz be defeated. Kiki didn't like the way Ruggedo acted either, for the former king of the gnomes wanted to do everything his own way, and made the boy, who alone possessed the power of transformations, obey his orders as if he were a slave. Another thing that disturbed Kiki Aru was the fact that the real wizard had arrived, who was said to possess many magical powers, and this wizard carried his tools in a black bag and was the friend of the Oz people, and so would probably try to prevent war between the beasts of the forest and the people of Oz. All these things passed through the mind of the high-up boy while the Cowardly Lion and Gugu the King were talking together, and that was why he now began to do several strange things. He had found a place near to the point where he stood, where there was a deep hollow in the rock. So he put his face into this hollow and whispered softly so he would not be heard. "I want the Wizard of Oz to become a fox. Pyrus Quickskull." The wizard, who had stood smilingly beside his friends, suddenly felt his form change to that of a fox, and his black bag fell to the ground. Kiki reached out an arm and seized the bag, and the fox cried as loud as it could, "Treason! There's a traitor here with magic powers!" Everyone was startled at this cry, and Dorothy, seeing her old friend's plight, screamed and exclaimed, "Mercy me!" But the next instant, the little girl's form had changed to that of a lamb with fleecy white wool, and Dorothy was too bewildered to do anything but look around her in wonder. The Cowardly Lion's eyes now flashed fire. He crouched low and lashed to the ground with his tail, and gazed around to discover who the treacherous magician might be. But Kiki, who had kept his face in the hollow rock, again whispered the magic word. The great lion disappeared, and in its place stood a little boy dressed in Munchkin costume. The little Munchkin boy was as angry as the lion had been, but he was small and helpless. Ruggedo the gnome saw what was happening and was afraid Kiki would spoil all his plans. So he leaned over the rock and shouted, "Stop, Kiki, stop!" Kiki would not stop, however. Instead, he transformed the gnome into a goose, to Ruggedo's horror and dismay. But the hungry tiger had witnessed all these transformations, and he was watching to see which of those present was to blame for them. When Ruggedo spoke to Kiki, the hungry tiger knew that he was the magician, so he made a sudden spring and hurled his great body full upon the form of the Librarian, crouching against the rock. Kiki didn't see the tiger coming, because his face was still in the hollow, and the heavy body of the tiger bore him to the earth just as he said Pyrrhus Gwixkull for the 5th time. So now the tiger which was crushing him changed into a rabbit, and relieved of its weight, Kiki sprang up and spread his eagle's wings, flew into the branches of a tree where no beast could easily reach him. He was not an instant too quick in doing this, for Gugu the king had crouched on the rock's edge and was about to spring on the boy. From his tree, Kiki transformed Gugu into a fat Gillikin woman and laughed aloud to see how the woman pranced with rage and how astonished all the beasts were at their king's new shape. The beasts were frightened too, fearing they would share the fate of Gugu. So a stampede began when Rango the gray ape sprang into the forest, and Bru the bear and Lu the unicorn followed as quickly as they could. The elephants backed into the forest, and all the other animals, big and little, rushed after them, scattering through the jungles until the clearing was far behind. The monkeys scrambled into the trees and swung themselves from limb to limb to avoid being trampled by the bigger beasts, and they were so quick that they distanced all the rest. A panic of fear seemed to have overtaken the forest people, and they got away, as far away from the terrible magician as they possibly could. But the transformed ones stayed in the clearing, being so astonished and bewildered by their new shapes that they could only look at one another in a dazed and helpless fashion, although each one was greatly annoyed at the trick that had been played on him. "Who are you?" asked the Munchkin boy to the rabbit. "And who are you?" the fox asked the lamb. "And who are you?" the rabbit asked the fat Gillikin woman. "I'm Dorothy," said the woolly lamb. "I'm the wizard," said the fox. "I'm the cowardly lion," said the Munchkin boy. "I'm the hungry tiger," said the rabbit. "I'm Gugu the king," said the fat woman. But when they asked the goose who he was, Ruggedo the gnome would not tell them. "I'm just a goose," he replied, "and that what I was before, I cannot remember." That's the end of our reading for today. Quite some exciting happenings there, with many of our friends getting transformed into something else. So I hope you'll return tomorrow to find out what new adventures will happen to our friends as we continue with these transformations and with Captain Bill and Trot stuck on that island, growing roots into the ground. So come back tomorrow and we will read a few more chapters. Until then, have a wonderful rest of your day.